When last we met, we were discussing Buddhism, one of my favorite religions, but then again, I could say that about most of them. And we had just been discussing the three marks of existence and the notion of nirvana. And it brings us up to the real gospel, the Four Noble Truths. This is the Dharma proper in Theravada Buddhism. And it tells us what to do. It's in the nature of an old medical diagnosis and prescription. There's a kind of a warning sign that goes off, a little red light when you see things so systematized. It's a hint that this is a mark of somewhat later systematization by the Buddhists rather than the original teaching of the Buddha. But really, I don't know what difference that makes. We can't really know what the original teaching of the Buddha was anyway, and even if there was one, naturally people are going to try to put it into some order they can remember, and this is probably as close as we're going to get. The Four Noble Truths. Well, the first one is that life is suffering. Now, you might say that's a little pessimistic, isn't it? Well, yeah, excuse me for repeating a little bit from the dukkha, or suffering, one of the three marks of existence, but let's just underline it this way. I'll remind you of Schopenhauer's statement that life is a pendulum swing between frustration and disappointment. You are suffering because you don't have some job, some relationship, some possession, some achievement. Then you get it and you say, in the words of the bodhisattva Peggy Lee, is that all there is? So it's on to the next thing. Yeah, that's why. Well, to what degree is life suffering? Well, it would be absurd to say it's an unremitting hell. Nobody says that. It's so one could live in a part of the world where it is, but you wouldn't have to affirm the first noble truth. At least all life is tainted and tinged with suffering. You might say that. No sooner do you start that longed-for vacation than you think, boy, this ain't going to last long. I'm going to be right back in the office before you know it. Do you have to ruin it that way? Well, you sort of can't help it because all things are passing, and you can't be unmindful of that. Yeah, no matter how good things are, there's always a little of the tarnish on it. Now, of course, there's also awful suffering, too, but my point here is that this is kind of like the Calvinist idea of total depravity. That doesn't mean you're like Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer, right? That's obviously not true. Total depravity is more of a Freudian idea, it seems to me, that no matter what you do, no matter how altruistic it appears, there's probably some sort of selfish motivation underneath it. It's that sort of thing, right? Nothing escapes the taint. And that's the idea here. Nothing is free totally from suffering, even on your best day. Well, now, why would that be? And, of course, this is what the Buddha set out to solve, right? He had been shielded from suffering, and once he finds out about it, in this great avalanche of revelation, the four passing sights, he says, geez, why hasn't anybody done anything about this? I guess they were all used to it and figured it had to be that way. My father's efforts to shield me from it have backfired because now that I see it, it's a shock. I realize what others don't. Something's got to be done about this. So if I could figure out what caused it, maybe we could figure out what to do about it. Well, again, that medical terminology, remember the first one, life is suffering, that's the symptomology, that's what's actually wrong with you. Doc, I got a pain right here. The second one, suffering is caused by desire. There's your etiology. The surface symptoms are caused by a root problem. Desire is what causes suffering. This is a world of impermanence. There is no lasting satisfaction possible. And thus, if you seek satisfaction here, guess what? You're going to be frustrated, right? You will never not be frustrated. Every collector knows this feeling, right? You can't wait to get the new so-and-so, and once you got it, shove it into the treasure chest and start hunting for something else. Yes, I know it too well. So desire, craving, and it's not just for worldly things and achievements and so on. It's desire for this life in samsara. You die in a state of craving, thinking, boy, I guess I didn't do so great this time, but if I had another crack at it, oh, what a mistake, because now you will. Too bad you wanted to undergo this whole thing again, because you're gonna. So suffering is caused by desire, both within a life and from life to life. I should say, if one did not believe in reincarnation, one could be some sort of demythologized modern Buddhist. You could limit all of this quite well to this life, one life, and it would make plenty of sense. But they even say, yes, desire is what causes you to reincarnate. Suffering is caused by desire. Now, that's a major difference between this and Hinduism. What most systems in the East of reincarnation say that you must be reborn to answer for your karma accumulated in a previous life or lives. You got to be around to be punished or rewarded. Buddhism says, well, no, you don't. If you are going to be reincarnated, indeed it is karma that will decide what happens to you, enjoyable or not. But the fact that you've got this agenda of karma to deal with and to face, that doesn't necessitate your coming back. You could short-circuit the process. You could jump off of the treadmill by no longer desiring. It is desire that causes reincarnation and suffering. This is the major point that Buddhism may have borrowed from Samkhya philosophy. They too believe that suffering was caused by desire. And you'll remember that our stories of the Buddha even have him studying with a guru who taught something that looks an awful lot like Samkhya philosophy. Well, the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, comes by the cessation of desire. You're not incurable. There is an answer, and it's a simple one. You know what they say, Doc, I only get this pain when I do this. Okay, I got the answer for you. Don't do that. Stop desiring. If you can rid yourself of this habit, of this mindset of desire, well, then no suffering. It's easier said than done, though I don't think anybody thinks it's going to be easy. The earliest Buddhists did apparently think it was going to be possible, though. They didn't think it was that big a burden. All right, well, how do you do this? Well, that's the fourth noble truth, which is really a kind of a segue into the next item, the eightfold path to liberation, and that this fourth noble truth is the cessation of desire. Comes by the noble eightfold path. We'll get into that in a second. What again, though, are the four noble truths? Well, first, life is suffering. Second, suffering is caused by desire. Third, the cessation of suffering comes by the cessation of desire. And so we've got the diagnosis here, and here's the prescription. The fourth one, the cessation of desire, comes by means of the eightfold path. And what is that? Well, it is something very much like Raja Yoga. Buddhism may have inherited that from the sages of the Upanishads who were contemporaries with the Buddha, or it may be an indigenous Dravidian spirituality, who knows? But the idea of yoga, this eight-staged form of mental discipline, here they are. Now, I have heard various explanations of these, and am no expert. But the first one is right knowledge. You got to get your head on straight. You have to know these truths. Stoicism, Gnosticism, they say the same thing. As long as you're just lost and confused, you don't know what is wrong with you, much less what to do about it, but now you do. because the Four Noble Truths, you have right knowledge, so you try to get your head around that. You get that straight. The second stage of the Eightfold Path is right aspiration. That is, one must resolve to enter upon this path, just knowing it is not going to do you any good. You've got to change your mindset. That is, to get into another item here, that probably is going to mean, at least in terms of Theravada Buddhism, you're going to have to resolve to become a monk or a nun. You're really talking about an aspiration, a career choice. Third, there is right speech. One does not offend in speech. One speaks modestly and hopefully truthfully, but some have thought that to avoid offense is better than to avoid inaccuracy. But right speech. That's, of course, ethics that would apply pretty much to anybody, but as Socrates said, you have to have moral discipline if you're going to go on for anything else. Just like an athlete has to discipline himself before he can learn his skills. The fourth stage of the Eightfold Path is right behavior. This is at least the commandments that bind the Buddhist layperson, which would include no meat or fish, I think, no intoxicating liquor, no illicit sex, and by this time you're thinking that's any sex at all because you're going the higher path of asceticism here, and no harm to living beings, and no lying and stealing and so on. So you've at least got to do that, and probably better. The fifth stage of the Eightfold Path is right livelihood. Now, here we're definitely into entering the monastery or the convent. Livelihood, what your occupation. Isn't this something of an elitist path? Well, yes, it is. But remember, if you're not up for it this time, your worldly commitments are too great. You should study what you can of this and be as good as you can, and then in a future life or lives, perhaps you will progress to being able to go the whole way toward monasticism. The sixth stage is right effort. And this at least means persistence over a long period of time. I remember seeing a show, one of Ronald Ayer's Long Search episodes, where he's interviewing monks in I think a Sri Lankan monastery. Some of them are succeeding pretty well in their meditation. One man says it is very difficult for him, and he came there from a career in business or something, and he just has a hard time with the concentration and is thinking of just chucking the whole thing and going back to the secular world. Well, that wouldn't be, I don't think that would be considered apostasy or anything, but that does highlight the point of right effort. It is going to take some resolution to stick with this. You're prepared to do that. That's one of the stages of the Eightfold Path. The seventh is right mindfulness. You should, and here we're getting into what will become Zen Buddhism. You must be present to your actions. You must not be on automatic pilot. You have to do everything you do mindfully, with self-possession. With clarity, putting yourself into your actions, and not just phoning it in, not just being automatic. Then there is right absorption, which refers to a trance state. The bonds of the individual ego and of desire are cut. Again, I have heard this expressed and explained and defined in other ways, so that the last couple of them have to do with particular states of meditation. I don't know. Again, there are different explanations of these things, but it at least involves what I'm saying here, a right absorption. This is not just a moral matter. There is a mystical trance state involved, or a mystical state of realization. It's not necessarily full-blooded mysticism. I guess you have the same sort of question with Plato. He talks about a kind of an enlightenment, though most scholars think he didn't believe there was a mystical experience of non-dualism or something. I guess you could ask the same question here, but you do reach an absorption in the truth, just as the person who goes through the 8 stages of Raja Yoga ideally attains enlightenment. Well, in Buddhism, if you do this, you are called an Arhat. It's A-R-H-A-T. But there's ambiguity. These languages are so different. I've also seen it transliterated as Arhat, with another syllable, or Arahant, with an N there, but I just stick with a short one. I guess I probably read that first, so I'm sticking with Arhat, A-R-H-A-T. That person is an adept. That is the virtuoso, the person who has attained nirvana in this lifetime. And as a result, he will not return for any more incarnations. Wait a minute, don't you have some unresolved business to deal with karmically? Well, no, you don't. You do, but you don't have to show up, let's put it that way. Because the nerve of desire has been cut, and you're not answerable for any more semesters in samsara. You have attained this state of enlightenment, and you probably won't continue in it non-stop. It's probably going to be intermittent, but accessible to you. And when you're done, when the body dies, you have attained nirvana once and for all. This trance state will be permanent. So this is the great goal of Theravada Buddhism. And remember what that is. It means the way of the elders. That is a good transition point to the other major family of Buddhisms, Mahayana Buddhism. Basically, we can look at the map and divide it into northern and southern Buddhism, by geographical dispersion, I guess. In the south of Asia, you have Theravada Buddhism, which is probably closer to original Buddhism, whatever that was. And where am I talking about here? Well, insofar as there were any Buddhists left in India, and there are some, there used to be quite a number, but Islam and Hindu revivalism kind of put an end to that. But Indian Buddhists would be Theravada Buddhists on the whole. In Sri Lanka, a.k.a. Ceylon, they would be Theravada Buddhists. In Indonesia, plenty of Buddhists there. They would be Theravadins. Buddhists in Thailand, a.k.a. Siam, or Burma, also known as Myanmar, they're Theravada Buddhists. Indochina, namely Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, Theravada Buddhists. And what does that leave us? I guess Singapore, they would be Theravadins also. Whereas the ones we're about to talk about now, the Mahayana Buddhists, they're up north, so that places them in the border kingdoms of the Himalayans. I know, you expect to hear Himalayans, and I usually do say that. But here, I guess I figure I should try to be as correct as I can. I feel the spirit of Agyananda Bharati, a great and comedic scholar of Hinduism and Buddhism, who just heaped scorn on the ignorant who would speak of the Himalayan mountains. No, it's Himalayans, and he would know. Well, anyway, take your pick. The kingdoms I'm talking about are Nepal, Bhutan, and Sikkim. One or two of them may be protectorates of India these days. I sort of think Sikkim is. Boy, they got beautiful flags. All three of these tiny little kingdoms up there on the ceiling of the world there. They share a lot of culture with Tibet. I'm wearing a Nepalese ring now, in fact, that has the Dorje, the lightning bolt scepter of the great lamas, and in their letters I've got Om Mani Padme Hum. And I tell you, this place is festooned with cheap commercial Buddhist statues and stuff. Alright, so the Himalayan kingdoms and Tibet to the north of them, Mongolia, China, Korea, Japan would all be Mahayana Buddhist. That's not to say there's nobody but these Buddhists up there. Of course, there are other religions too in all these countries, but that's the kind of Buddhism you would have. Well, you know, what is the idea of Mahayana Buddhism? Well, the word Maha, the prefix, means great. Like Mahavira, the greatly virile one, or the great hero, or Maharaja, the great king, the great royal one, and Maharani, the great queen, Maharishi, the great seer, and so on. So what is Yana? Well, that could mean, well, let's say it means way, and that could mean either career, the path you tread, or vehicle, that which takes you along it. And I've read references to both. Mahayana means both. The greater vehicle, a broader Buddhist path that can accommodate the people as well as the elite. I don't think that's quite right, though, to tell you the truth, because both types of Buddhism have very similar structures with a plan A and a plan B, the high road and the low road, so that everybody is accommodated. So I feel a little odd about that. I think that's confusing. I tend to go with the theory that makes it refer to the chosen path of the one who takes it seriously. What way are you taking? It is a higher path than the old Theravada. At least that's what its advocates say. And what is the difference? The higher goal, the greater career. It is that of the bodhisattva. Let me just say briefly, this means that you are not satisfied with becoming an Arhat, though you do go that far. You do attain that mastery, that degree of liberation and enlightenment. But the goal is not to be saved, but rather to become a savior in Mahayana Buddhism. And any idiot can see that is the greater vehicle, the great goal. Now you might think, wait a minute, I've managed to attain salvation, and that's just step one? Well, yeah, you got to be doing something, right? Might as well be working for the salvation of all beings. Why not? And that's what you're going to be doing. If you are a Mahayana Buddhism, that is the greater way, the greater path that you are taking. That is why you are a Mahayana Buddhist. Now, let me go back to a piece of nomenclature from last week, barely mentioned then. I think I said that, but of course that was another incarnation practically, who can remember these things, that the Mahayana Buddhists have a disparaging name for their colleagues in the South. They call them the Hinayana Buddhists. So the people that call themselves Theravada Buddhists are referred to by their northern rivals as the Hinayana, or lesser vehicle, or lesser way, or lesser career. They don't call themselves Hinayana, but in scholarly discussions you may see these terms interchangeably applied. Are you a Hinayana or Theravada Buddhist down there in Sri Lanka? Either one. So if I were among them, for instance, just the other day, yesterday, I was talking to a pal of mine from Thailand, a guy named Ake, and he was saying how if he went back to his homeland, he would probably have to undergo the ritual of the going out of the Buddha, in which they have a puberty rite, though he's past that. But he never underwent this, a rite in which young men have to shave their heads, put on the saffron robe, and go out and live in a monastery for a year to see what it was like for the Buddha to give up everything. That's a fascinating custom that Buddhists in Thailand have. Not even all Theravadins do that, but that's what they are. So I don't know that it came up exactly, but, well, I think I just called his group the Theravadins. I said, that's Theravada Buddhism. It might have been impolitic, though he might not know the difference had I referred to it instead as Hinayana. Oh, the lesser Buddhism. Oh, yeah, I got that. So that's one of those things, I guess, like Muslims really don't appreciate being called Mohammedans. No. As Abu Bakr said after the death of the Prophet, for those who worship Muhammad, know this: Muhammad is dead. Those who worship Allah, know this: Allah lives. Very insightful. Yeah, so they don't want to be called Mohammedans. Same thing, I would call these guys Theravadins next time you're in your Thai restaurant. All right, so the names. I love the name game. What is the Bodhisattva doctrine? What does it mean to become a Bodhisattva, a savior? Well, this term rings a bell, or should. This was what Gautama was called during his life when he was Prince Siddhartha, while he was on his way toward Buddhahood. That's what they call him in the texts. The Bodhisattva did this. He began to suspect that there was suffering in the world, and the Bodhisattva thought, now what am I going to do about this, etc. Well, all right, the same word applies to anyone who is on the path toward Buddhahood. Literally, Bodhisattva means one whose satta, or the essence, is bodhi, enlightenment. But the connotation, I can't ever keep those straight, is one who's on the path toward Buddhahood. They haven't quite gone through the whole thing. That almost ceases to matter at one point in Mahayana Buddhism, but the Bodhisattva is not just Prince Siddhartha, but anybody that is headed toward becoming enlightened and then a savior. And you can become one. In fact, why don't you? I remember Tony Campolo, kind of a left liberal evangelical of the kind who will certainly be accepting Barack Obama as his personal savior. Campolo was speaking at some youth conference, and he anticipates what people will say. He says, what, you saying everybody ought to be like Mother Teresa? And he said, not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Well, yeah, that's Bodhisattva talk. Why shouldn't you? All right, I know she has some problems, but pick whatever saint you want, whichever saint you like. Albert Schweitzer, Dr. King. Oh, jeez, I could never do that. Oh, maybe you couldn't, maybe you could. How are you going to know? Maybe, we could use a few more Dr. Kings, a few more Florence Nightingales. Florence Nightingale left behind some writings in which she hinted that she viewed herself as the second coming of Christ. Well, pretty good candidate, I'd say. You could be too. Why not? You should aim at it and become a bodhisattva. Take the vow. Now, where do we get the idea that you and I, or at least some folks, could become like Gautama the Buddha? That's kind of a tall order, right? Who would cook up some notion like this? I mean, in Christianity, when early Jewish Christians, Gnostic Christians too, said, yeah, Jesus was the great revealer, the true prophet, all that. Why don't you try to be one too? Oh, no, that was just stomped on as heresy. But here, I figure, well, not a bad idea. But where would you come up with such an outrageous belief? Well, it was built squarely on at least 4 traditional Theravada beliefs. I mean, this wasn't pulled out of a hat somewhere. This didn't get imported from without. No. This belief was not present in earlier Buddhism, but it grows very consistently out of beliefs that were. And the first one was the simple fact they believed that the one we know as Prince Siddhartha, Gautama Buddha, had lived many lives previously, accumulating good karma to prepare to become worthy of the task of being the Buddha. This is where you get this huge bunch of Buddhist folk stories called the Jataka tales, the tales of the births, literally the previous births of the Buddha. He was human, he was an animal. In every case, he does some righteous deed. And why? Well, what's the point? Well, if you believe in reincarnation, presumably his life as Prince Siddhartha wasn't his first time out. What would he have been doing in the earlier lives? Playing pool? What would he have been doing? Well, it stands to reason he'd have been doing good deeds. And you also have the same question: how come it was this guy? Nobody else in his generation discovered what he did. Why him? I mean, win the sweepstakes or something? Well, this belief that he had lived previous lives accumulating good karma gave an answer to that. Well, it wasn't random. He had been befitting himself for the task by accumulating all this incredibly good karma. As though there was one where he had lived a previous incarnation as a tiger, and in a time of famine, he just lay down and let other animals eat him up to death. He was giving his life for others. And in fact, in the Jataka tales, it says there's not a stinking square foot of ground on earth in which the bodhisattva did not give his life for another. In all these stories, he's known as the bodhisattva because it's only in his life as Prince Siddhartha that he became the Buddha. So in all these, he is yet the bodhisattva. Well, look, if he did that, which means he wasn't an unapproachable God doing feats unrepeatable by mortals, that he was immortal, then, well, presumably you and I could do the same thing. I don't have much of a track record. I'm no big deal. Well, maybe not. I mean, you may have lived an infinite number of lives in the past, all pretty mediocre, but the game's not over. You could turn about and head in the right direction. I mean, you're going to be doing something anyway. You might as well. Why live incarnation after incarnation twiddling your thumbs? So why don't you decide, okay, I'm going to attain salvation and help others to be saved. I mean, that's what the Buddha did. It raises the possibility, is all I'm saying, that others could too. Hey, interesting. So you can see how this bodhisattva doctrine, though not already part of Buddhism in the Theravada beginnings, easily grew out of it. Second thing, not only could there be other Buddhas, there had been other Buddhas. There were 24 previous to Prince Siddhartha. There were loads of them. In fact, he learned about the Buddhist Dharma from a previous Buddha, a man named Dipankara. Did he actually exist? Look, by now you know that's nearly an impossible question to answer, but the story is that he met the Venerable Dipankara. Boy, I love that name. I can't say it as well as the Swami Streetmananda, my great teacher in these things, said, but Dipankara, he's mentioned in the great Buddhist gospel, the Lotus Sutra, the Sadharma Pundarika, the true law of the lotus, and great work. So he learned from Dipankara, and there were loads of others. In fact, in some Buddhist sects, including one we're going to talk about later, Prince Siddhartha is even outshone by another Buddha named Amitabha, who created the pure land of salvation. In fact, I would say that Amitabha Buddha is probably a more popular devotional focus in Buddhism than Prince Siddhartha is. So there have been 24 previous Buddhas. Prince Siddhartha was number 25. Well, if that's the case, you know, there could be plenty more, and might as well be you. Here's a third little item of Theravada Buddhism that raises the question of bodhisattvaship. There was the little detail of the story of the Buddha and his temptations. You know, I don't think I mentioned that this past... no, I don't think I did. I got to toss this in. This is not considered canonical scripture, whatever that means, but it's a very, very famous legend anyway. I believe I did mention how the Buddha, disillusioned with the monks and the gurus with whom he had studied, decided that he was going to plunk himself down under a tree and not get the heck up, bed sores or no, until he had discovered what he was looking for. And he did, and again, there have been different estimates as to how long he was there. Was it a single night? Was it some months? I've read both. Doesn't matter, though. He's determined to get it. Now, about this time, you're going to love this. Mara, the tempter, the king of the material world, a kind of Satan figure. Satan especially is in the Gospel of Luke, where he appears to tempt Jesus and says, you just swear fealty to me, Jesus, my boy, and I will give you the kingdoms of the world, which I can do. It's no empty promise. They've all been given to me, and, you know, the spoil system, I can delegate them to whoever I want. That'll be you, sonny. You just need to sign on the dotted line. He says, get the hell out of here, Satan. Same sort of thing here. Mara, the tempter, runs the show, and he is upset that Prince Siddhartha, Gautama, is about to discover what keeps his addicts addicted. He wants people to patronize this world of his and to keep suffering and to keep desiring and to stupidly keep wanting to come back, gluttons for punishment. He doesn't want somebody discovering, hey, we're getting screwed here. We're being made fools of. We're just playing this guy's game. We're playing right into his hands. Let's cut it out. Well, that's what the Buddha's about to start teaching, right? You can exit this world of samsara. Oh, no. Mara doesn't want that. I mean, he's the head of the Chamber of Commerce in samsara. So he says, I got to put a stop to this. This guy's about to discover what's going on here. So he engineers several temptations to distract the Buddha from his meditation. In one of them, he sends word that the Buddha's cousin, Devadatta, who is the Buddhist Judas, trying to confute the Buddha at every turn, Devadatta has taken over the kingdom of Siddhartha's father, King Suddhodana, and boy, do they need him to come home right now. And he sees through this. He said, look, even if it's true, what's really important? Should I save my father and his kingdom for what? just going to come back again for more of the same violence and all that. No, my duty is to find a way out of this hellhole. Well, so that doesn't work. Then he decides to distract him with a kind of a Las Vegas floor show. He brings in his 3 sexy daughters to do some kind of bump and grind routine before Prince Siddhartha. And is that a top knot in your hair? Are you just glad to see me? And he sees through this. I mean, he had all kinds of dancing girls and such back in the old palace. Get out of here. I got some meditating to do. Then he then Mara challenges his right to the piece of ground he's sitting on. Look at you. What presumption. Let me get this straight. You are going to find out what's wrong with the human race and what to do about it. Come on. Move along, sonny. Move along. And the earth testifies that no, he does have the right. We've been waiting for this guy. Well, then there's a huge storm of hail and sleet, meteorites and stuff. But the Buddha is protected, or the bodhisattva is protected by the great Naga king, the 7-headed serpent, the 7-headed cobra, who comes up out of the earth and forms a canopy to shield him. Oh, all right, what's next? There is a rain from the sky of poisoned axes and harpoons and swords and so forth. You'd think that'd kind of scare a guy, right? But no, because the gods cause all these things to turn into so many flowers that fall harmlessly around the Buddha. Now, I think that's 5. Mara says, look, that's all I got. And he retreats, and he's thinking, boy, I'm really screwed now. And he says, wait a second. Yeah, there's one thing I haven't tried. So he goes back into the presence of Siddhartha, who now has gained the truth. He's become enlightened. He understands the 4 noble truths. And Mara says, well, you beat me fair and square. You've learned the secret that I tried to keep hidden. Why don't you just take advantage of it? You don't have to be reincarnated anymore. Why don't you just stick to your trance state, and when the time comes, leave this crummy world of mine. You don't need to bother telling anybody else, because you know as well as I do, they'll never listen to you. You're the only one that seems to be ill at ease here. The rest of them want this dump. So why don't you just do yourself a favor and go on to nirvana? And the Buddha, not tempted or distracted in the least by these previous temptations, has to consider this one seriously. This is the only one that actually gives him pause. Because, much as it says in John 12, he didn't need anybody to tell him what was in the heart of man. And he says, you got a point there. Most people really don't want to know what I got to tell them. And Mara said, yeah, that's right. And finally, though, he says, nah, some will listen. And he gets up and heads on back to Sarnath, to the deer park, to find the monks. And he does preach his first sermon, as I said last week, and that's the initial turning of the wheel of the Dharma, and Mara's there, cussing, I've been jipped, you cheated, just like Mr. Applegate and Dan Yankees, or Mr. Scratch in The Devil and Daniel Webster, same sort of a scene. All right, now what does that have to do with the Bodhisattva doctrine? Well, just this. Mahayana Buddhists say, congratulations, mister, you've become an Arhat. If you're satisfied with that, what's the difference between you and the Buddha had he yielded to that 6th temptation? Had he said, to hell with all these jerks, I'm not wasting my time on them, they don't even want salvation. Which, seems pretty plausible, and it still is. It would be a long, hard road. It would be quite a challenge. But if you say, look, I've done my bit, I'm enlightened, what, you are telling me you overcame the ego and now you don't give a damn about anybody else? No. Just as the Buddha decided he would continue on in the midst of humanity, which he did for several decades, you ought to decide to continue on in this world of samsara for the good of others, to facilitate their salvation, because I got news for you. Until everybody is saved, nobody can be saved. I'll tell you why that is in a second. Let's see, I just need to tell you one other thing about these roots of the bodhisattva doctrine. The point of it, of course, is there can be other Buddhas, and you ought to strive to be one. Again, this did not sound so strange or unprecedented, because by the time of the 3rd century BCE, even in Theravada Buddhism, there had arisen the belief that another Buddha would come, that Gautama Buddha was not the climax of the series, that there would be another, and he would be known as Matria Buddha. I'm sure you've heard his name. There are various New Age people claiming to either be Matria Buddha or to channel him. Means the friendly Buddha. There's all the big fat Buddhas are Matria. He hasn't come to Earth yet, but he will from the Western paradise. I have a sneaking hunch he is some kind of a transfiguration of Mithras, but leave that speculation alone. Why is there a need for another to come? Well, it's true that all religions glorify their origins. They have golden age stories, like in the book of Acts. In the first couple of weeks of the church, Peter's single-handedly preaching sermons to huge crowds without benefit of a microphone or a PA system, and something like 8,000 people get baptized. Come on. This never happened. But you have stories like that of people flocking to the banner. In the same way, Buddhism says when Gautama Buddha was on earth preaching, people were lining up to get enlightened, and it worked. I mean, he had an optimistic approach, saying, look, you can just lay down the burden of your bad karma. Forget it. You can short-circuit the process. You can do what I'm telling you. A noble eightfold path, it will work. Make me a liar. Prove that it doesn't. And loads of people found that it did work and became monks and nuns and so on. Now, obviously, if this was the beginning of a religion, a lot of people did flock to it, but how many of them felt that they had gained nirvana already in this life? I don't know. Maybe a lot of them did. But at any rate, I mean, it could well be that if there was a historical Buddha, he had such charisma that he was able to catalyze this in other people. That wouldn't be surprising, right? That's often the case of the charisma of a religious founder. So whether it's historical hindsight fading into mythology, or whether it's real historical memory, the belief was that it must have been much easier in the dawn age of Buddhism, in the first generation, to attain enlightenment, because we sure as hell can't seem to do it now. And they said, well, what, are we just stuck? We're just screwed here? I mean, are we any better off than we were before the Buddha showed up? I mean, can't seem to do it. With rare exceptions. And so the belief came about, well, all right, we live in a degenerate age. That's true. And the floodlight of the Dharma played about the Buddha when he was here. He isn't here now. Things are dimmer. We're off the mountaintop back into the valley. We still need help, and one day another Buddha is going to come, and he will transform the world into a millennial paradise. And at that time, the pressure will somehow be off. Everybody can easily hear the Dharma as Maitreya Buddha preaches it and be enlightened, no problem. Now, this is a Theravada belief that arose out of despair. And they said, all right, that doesn't do me any good right now, but if I pray hard and do good works, I can aim at being incarnated in that generation some thousands of years. I believe originally the estimate was 5,000 years in the future when Matria will come. I'll have plenty of incarnations before that, hopefully none after, because I can be enlightened during that one. So it won't be soon, but I'm going to get a ticket now on the wings of him. Hallelujah. Oh, wrong religion, sorry. So you see what I'm getting at. This is already shifting the spotlight to a future Buddha and putting your hopes in the basket of a savior. It's like despairing that you can do what you need to do to become an Arhat, back when that's the goal in Theravada Buddhism. Just can't seem to do it. Well, I can in the future thanks to Matria Buddha, which kind of means he's going to do it for me, right? He will guarantee my birth in this world, this age in which you just can't not get enlightened if you want to. So, in effect, you're saying I'm absolved of my failure to do it now, and I won't even really have to try then. So it's the introduction of a notion of grace, such as the historical Buddha, if there was one, appeared not to countenance, right? Nobody can stop you from doing it. You need not despair. You can do it. Well, here, these people felt like, gee, I tried. We can't. But let's do our best to arrange to be incarnated as contemporaries of Matria, and then we'll be saved. Well, oh yeah, that is a major feeder into the bodhisattva doctrine, because the bodhisattvas, here's the two-track system. The bodhisattvas are a minority of people who have decided to go ahead toward Buddhahood, and whether they are individuals you see on earth, and there are such bodhisattvas, or they're believed to be off in heaven someplace, the Sambhogakaya, as it's called, the heavenly realm of the Buddhists and bodhisattvas. If they're up there answering prayers, it doesn't matter. The idea is that they are living for the benefit of everybody else, accruing good karma, vastly in excess of what they would ever need to be saved, so that they can share the rewards with all of us slobs who call upon their name in faith and siphon off some of their good karma, even toward becoming Buddhas ourselves one day. We need some help doing that for sure, and that's great, because it's their job to provide that help. And so there's this two-track system. Now remember, there was in Theravada Buddhism too, I guess implicitly, let me just make it explicit, most people weren't going to become monks and nuns, but what then would they do? Well, they would be nice, conventional Buddhist householders and believers, and they would get good karma by supporting those few who did become monks and nuns, who would go around during the day begging, trick-or-treating from door to door. And that was fine. It was a privilege for you to give them a ladle full of rice or whatever, because that was just like in the Gospel of Matthew. I tell you, whoever gives a righteous man a cup of cold water will receive a righteous man's reward. Whoever gives a tzaddik, a righteous man, the reward, or a prophet, he will receive the reward of a tzaddik or a prophet. Same thing here. You can get in on the act. You can buy blessing and good karma by supporting those who have withdrawn from secular occupations to seek salvation. You can kind of ride their coattails. Now, it's already that way in Theravada Buddhism. It's going to stay that way in Mahayana, but it's been theologized to the point where, all right, I may not have the motivation or the strength to tread the path of the bodhisattva myself in this life, but I can call upon those who have, whether on earth or in heaven. The bodhisattvas will come to my aid. So, you see, both of them have a two-track system, a very similar one, in fact. You kind of feather in your nest by helping the bodhisattvas, but it's just that in the case of the Mahayana, you are getting grace from them, and they're dispensing it to you. Again, that's damn close to the Theravada thing, where if you feed me door to door, you're getting karmic points for a better life, which might mean a life in which you will have the spiritual discernment to become a monk or a nun yourself. So very similar. I mean, I guess that shouldn't be much of a surprise since one system evolves into another. I hate to risk confusing you, but I don't want to oversimplify either. Okay, so what happens once the bodhisattva doctrine takes over and Mahayana Buddhism begins, because that is the big thing that distinguishes Mahayana Buddhism? Well, here are some results. There's a lot of changes. The Arhat ideal is superseded. I don't want to say it vanishes. You're still going to go through pretty much the same routine, though it's divvied up a little differently and given different names, but you are still going to attain that. But it's not an end in itself, right? That is deemed selfish, a very odd irony if we're trying to overcome self. So you replace the Arhat ideal with the ideal of the bodhisattva. You strive not to become saved in the first instance, to become a savior, a Buddha yourself. No one will be saved until all sentient beings are saved. What? You don't want to be a speciesist, right? What about all the bugs and the flowers? No problemo. They will incarnate and reincarnate and eventually become sentient beings and be liberated too, because the Buddha nature is in all things. Everything can be saved eventually. It's going to take a long time. Though he or she has accumulated the good karma necessary to attain nirvana, the point of the Arhat, he or she defers this and lingers for the sake of people on earth. Lingers either in the Sambhogakaya, hey, you get off of my cloud, or on earth. And there are people, in fact, you know of a very famous one, the Dalai Lama. He's a bodhisattva. He is one of the earthly incarnations of Avalokiteshvara, the Lord of Compassion. We'll get to him in a minute. A great bodhisattva. Either way, they're doing good for the human race to enable everyone to be saved. Thanks to their grace, you may in a future life vow to be the salvation of others too. Or maybe you'll just hang on the coattails the whole time, but stay on Plan B, tourist class. Us Protestants go coach. But it all works out pretty neatly. Okay, the Four Noble Truths, kiss them goodbye. The Eightfold Path, sayonara. They are effectively replaced by the 6 paramitas and the 10 bhumis. The what? Oh, I'm not speaking in tongues. It's just Sanskrit. The 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections. The 10 bhumis, or the VHUMIS, as if you didn't know. It means the 10 stages. And they refer to the same thing, basically. In the first 6 stages, you attain each of the 6 perfections, and then you got 4 more stages, right? That's simple. The first of these perfections is giving. You have a self-giving attitude, as the Bodhisattva did in the Jataka Tales. You give up your possessions to the common fund of the monastery. Possessions are of no interest to you any longer. Trinkets passing away. The second perfection is morality, or pretty much the same thing as right behavior. The third one is patience, which I assume must be pretty much the same thing as right effort, persistence, etc. But then again, what's the difference between that and the fourth one? Rigor, R-I-G-O-R. You got to be pretty tough on yourself. Like St. Francis of Assisi said, he used to call his, he'd speak to Brother Flower and Brother Bird and all that, but he referred to his own body as Brother Ass, his Brother Donkey, who was stubborn and wouldn't do what he wanted. But you got to be pretty tough on yourself. Or in the pastoral epistles, Paul says that he buffets his body daily to keep himself in line. Why, you know good. The fifth one is concentration, and that's meditative discipline. The sixth one is wisdom. That doesn't just mean, a penny saved is a penny earned. That doesn't just mean Book of Proverbs type wisdom, though I'm certainly not disparaging that. Not at all. But a particular definition of wisdom, enlightenment, understanding the true nature of things, which is the void, emptiness, thusness, suchness, sunyata. This is the non-dualist doctrine that influenced Shankara over in Hinduism. This is already percolating in Buddhism long before, and this is probably where Shankara learned some of this and adapted it. I just keep in mind here, I knew a student once who just insisted against all fact that Buddhism was prior to Hinduism. Now, tain't the case, but what is true is that once both of them are on the scene, they tend to influence each other. So, yes, there are some aspects of Buddhism that are older than some in Hinduism. Where are we? Well, that is what the wisdom of the sixth perfection is. Realization of a kind of non-dualism. And I want to deal with this more in a moment, but again, the idea is that all of the worldly distinctions that we sense and see and perceive are illusory. They're all Maya, and if we are wise, we see the oneness. And this is an experience that even atheist mystics have spoken about. They realize that such an experience does not prove anything metaphysically. It's just like what Freud said, the oceanic feeling of oneness, a return to the womb. Yeah, sure, why not? What's the problem? And here's what's interesting about it. Buddhists are like atheists who are mystics. Admittedly, not a whole lot of those, but the Buddhist says, yes, indeed, it proves nothing about metaphysics, and we're not even talking about metaphysics. We're not getting into what is ontologically real. We are simply talking about what one experiences. That's it. And one comes to this state of wisdom where we no longer experience the world divvied up into perceivable objects and so on. We see that all so-called truths are half-truths that are distorting what we see. So let's just keep a finger there, put a bookmark there. The sixth paramita, or perfection, occurring in the sixth stage, is that one attains wisdom. Now, I am not sure, well, I do have an idea, but I'm not sure why that is not considered already to be Buddhahood, to tell you the truth. This is even more spectacular than what the Theravadins said the Buddha determined, right, to describe it this way. But there are these four more stages, bhumis, that one goes through to become a bodhisattva, and the seventh is non-returning. Nothing can go wrong. Buddhahood is now inevitable. No more reincarnations, unless you choose to appear in the world for the good of others again. And even then, it's not exactly an incarnation, as we'll see, but you do not have to return to this world again. That's what they said about the Arhat, and really, 6 and 7 here really are the equivalent of the Arhat stage. Buddhahood, though not yet attained, is now inevitable. I should say that according to the earlier definitions, you might as well say it had been attained, but technically not, and here's why. Let's go to the eighth paramita, or perfection, or stage. there is celestial existence in the Sambhogakaya, the glorious heaven of the Buddhas and bodhisattvas, where you'll be floating around on clouds, ruling your own worlds, and answering prayers. You might even do what Avalokiteshvara did as a disembodied bodhisattva. You might go to hell to suffer for the sinners and work off some of their bad karma for them. Wouldn't that be atoning suffering, such as Christians predicate of Jesus? You got it. That's exactly right. Nor did they get it from that. Nor did Christians get it from this. It's just a case of homologous development, where the human mind, playing with the same deck of cards all over the world throughout the ages, faces certain questions and comes up with a range of answers again and again. People are going to hit the same jackpot, many times over the centuries. So if anybody tells you that Christianity alone has the doctrine of grace, that's not true. Not that it matters, but they're just misinformed. Uniqueness doesn't prove the truth of anything. I mean, Nazism was probably pretty unique, but yuck. However, old Adolf loved things Hindu and Buddhist, unfortunately. And he pretty much ruined for all time a perfectly good holy symbol, the swastika, which is a symbol of good luck and blessing in all the Eastern religions. Sometimes people are kind of shocked to see some Buddhist or Jainist or Hindu iconography with the swastika on it. What is this? Are they Nazis? Nah. Adolf and his gang ripped this off from the Eastern religions. That's how the Nazis got some of their cachet, by having a good idea for decorating their bigotry with interesting items from better worldviews. Sambhogakaya, the glorious heaven of the Buddhas and bodhisattvas, that is not the ultimate reality. That is more like a heaven of the gods, but we'll see what is the ultimate reality in a bit. Last two stages to go through. The bodhisattva, after an undetermined length of time in the Sambhogakaya, ventures out to appear on earth again, and I do underline appear. If you remember docetism from the New Testament and early Christianity, from the Greek word dokeo, to appear, to seem. Docetism was the idea that Jesus seemed to be a flesh and blood man, but he was not. He was a phantom who merely took on the appearance of human flesh for obvious reasons to communicate with mortals, but he would change appearance sometimes just so you understood. Most people didn't even know this, supposedly, but some would see, he must really be a god with no one form, or he could never change forms. Very similar with the Buddha. Buddhism developed docetism of their own. It appeared that Prince Siddhartha was just a baby in the cradle. But then, come on, how many babies can get up out of their bassinet and walk 7 steps in each direction and say, I am supreme in this world, or this is my final birth, there will be no more births for me. Shut up and get your bottle. I love that kind of stuff. In that French movie from the 80s that for some reason upset a lot of people, about the Nativity, about the Virgin Mary, I forget what it was called now, where they replay the Nativity in modern France, I think it was. It's very reverent. Just really nothing controversial about it. It doesn't take much to get certain feathers ruffled. It's really funny. Jesus is a kid, just 3 or 4 years old, and his parents are packing a picnic lunch. They're going to go out in the country, and they're getting ready, and out of nowhere, young Jesus says, "I am he who is." And Joseph says, "Get in the car." That's great. And that's in the spirit of the infancy gospels. And this too, right? Because any baby that's talking like that is no baby. He only seems to be, right? And the same thing will be true. He might appear to suffer, but he doesn't suffer. And might appear to be limited by mortal parameters, but he's not. And if you had spiritual insight, maybe you could see the real flaming, gigantic spiritual form of this person. Well, so what this means is that the bodhisattva, any bodhisattva, is going to be born, apparently, and then going to live the life that Gautama lived, Prince Siddhartha lived, blow by blow, step by step, all as one long charade, studying with the 2 gurus, wasting his time with the monks, the whole 4 passing sites before that, the whole darn thing, until he finally sits under the Bodhi tree to gain enlightenment, and that is the 10th bhumi, the last stage. He's enlightened under the Bodhi tree. Now, what enlightenment does he get there that he didn't already have in stage 6? You tell me. I'm speaking out of ignorance, I admit. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's all a kind of a sanctified charade during these last 2 stages. He's just got to go through the motions. It's like following along the stations of the cross. You're really already there, as attested by the fact that you've attained non-returning. You couldn't deserve to be put down in the sequence again. That's just not going to happen. A little story about that. One of the earliest debates to arise among the Buddhists after the Buddha was that somebody brought up the question, well, I think I did it. I think I became an Arhat, but I don't want to take the chance on backsliding and losing my spiritual consciousness. You think it would be okay if I committed suicide? So I'd be doing that in the full strength of my enlightenment. I wouldn't have to worry about screwing up and having to be reincarnated after all. And they said, no, you can't. I haven't read this, but I'd just be willing to bet an incarnation or 2 that the reasoning was, look, pal, if you're that afraid of backsliding, I have a sneaking hunch you haven't really arrived. I don't think you'd be worried about that if you really had experienced nirvana, if you had a firm grip on it. But this non-returning means, that's impossible. Don't worry, it couldn't happen. You know too much now. You can't really degrade and backslide as if you didn't know it. So you go through the stages, and of course this means that when Prince Siddhartha did the whole thing, he was just going through the motions, because Amitabha Buddha and Dipankara Buddha and Manjushri Buddha and these various other Buddhas had all done the same thing in the past, and Matria would do the same thing in the future. What do you make of that? Well, it's docetism, all right, and it's a kind of ritual, and it's a kind of way of the cross thing. You've got to follow in the footsteps, perhaps literally. And here is an antidote to what seems to me to have hardened into a kind of an absurdity. I like to think of what Hermann Hesse did with this. I mentioned this last time in his great book Siddhartha, where this guy hears Gautama Buddha preach and is inspired to follow his example, which is the very reason he does not become a Buddhist. He says, well, if I really want to do what this guy did, I got to strike out on my own path, not his. He wasn't imitating anybody. I can't imitate him if I want to be faithful to him. Whoa, that's mighty interesting. But here, you see the alternative. You harden the thing. And admittedly, this is a kind of a myth. But no doubt there are people on Earth who believe they are here to finish up the course of the bhumis and do go through the the ritual. And I'm not criticizing them. I should love to see such a thing. That would be a great ritual to see. How would you know where along the stage you are? I suppose it would come to you through meditation. I don't know. Well, one thing's for sure, this is a long job, a long process. The bodhisattva is undertaking a course of millions of lifetimes of good works to accumulate more karma than he could possibly need in order to share it with poor mortal slobs like myself. The greatest of bodhisattvas is he who I mentioned a moment ago, Avalokiteshvara. That is based on the root Ishvara, the Lord. Shankara called the demiurge, the personal creator, Ishvara. General word, the Lord. Avalokit, etc. What does that mean? Well, he's often called the Lord who looks down in compassion. And if that is in providence, like he's not letting you stray far away, he's keeping an eye on his beloved. Now, this bodhisattva has come to be a crown of devotion, surpassing almost anybody else. Now, I would think it's kind of neck and neck in devotion between him and Amitabha or Amida Buddha, the focus of belief in Pure Land Buddhism. But at least the devotees of Avalokiteshvara say that he is the greatest of bodhisattvas and indeed encompasses all other Buddhas and bodhisattvas in himself. That idea is not all that odd. In the East, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that all the gods are part of him, which I take to mean they are lower level manifestations of him. And so Avalokiteshvara rules the roost. The others are all forms of him somehow. And he is the example par excellence of the one who gains temporary relief for the damned in hell. What? Hell? Buddhists believe in hell? Oh, yeah, you don't know a fraction of it. Oh, bhikkhu, oh, monk. They believe in a fantastic number of fiendishly unimaginable, sadistic torture chambers described in fiendish detail. And like there's the dotted line hell, where they trace out dotted lines on your flesh to trace where the buzz saws are going to get to work. I mean, it's incredible. Let's say Western hell hath no fury like that of the Buddhist cosmogony. Unbelievable. So it's a good thing we got somebody there mediating for us. There's similar things in other religions. Catholics believe that the Virgin Mary mitigates the sufferings of hell every once in a while for the damned. In Judaism, the Sabbath is personified as the Queen Sabbath, and she occasionally gets relief for the damned as well on the Sabbath, naturally. So Avalokiteshvara does this too. I say he, you may know him by another name after his transgendering transformation. For some reason, when the missionaries brought the worship of Avalokiteshvara across the Himalayas, they redrew the bodhisattva as Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy. Same entity. I imagine she's even more popular in that form now. You know what happened? Don't ask me. I have no idea. But you can get. Well, I noticed that you can get any number of statues in Buddhist catalogs of Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy, But it's tough finding one of Avalokiteshvara. I have two. One of them is a kind of a clay thing, garishly painted, which shows Avalokiteshvara in a lotus position with his 6 arms, holding different objects. And another one, oh man, I love this one, where some sort of synthestone thing, where he's got 4 arms and all sorts of radiant galaxies are glowing around him. Man, these are great. I can't imagine the Buddha would have permitted these things in his presence. Like, that's all you need, right? Material trinkets for Buddhism. But I admit I'm a superficial guy. It's just like action figures to me. I find them appropriate. But I had to, do a little looking to find a male version of this. I guess I just like the weird long name and all of that. Real popular. In fact, I would imagine this is the origin point of Bhakti Yoga. It's probably originated in Buddhism and passed on over into Hinduism. Remember that devotional, emotional yoga, the devotion to his personal savior. Avalokiteshvara is the Buddhist one par excellence. What is the great virtue of any bodhisattva? Well, it's compassion, is in the case of Avalokiteshvara. But we can define that a little more. It's also called karuna, K-A-R-U-N-A. Sounds like some sort of Hawaiian drink or something, but this means disinterested, impartial compassion toward all beings. I'm not playing favorites, and I've got no horse in this race. That doesn't mean I am indifferent to the fate of suffering humanity. No, just the opposite. They all matter equally to me. This is the 7th stage, the final stage of maturity of faith that Jim Fowler talks about in his fascinating book, Stages of Faith, where you get to the point, presumably, Dr. King and Albert Schweitzer and Florence Nightingale attained, where, you look at these people and say, I don't know if I'd ever want to do that. They've sacrificed their own personal interests for the interests of all humanity, and I admire that, but I don't know if I could make that sacrifice. Well, if you ask these people, how can you make that sacrifice? What sacrifice are you talking about? Their spirits have grown to the point where they don't perceive themselves as having any private interests. What motivates them is the interests of the whole human race. They don't see a sacrifice. That is what they're interested in. The center of the circle has grown to be co-equal, co-extensive with the circumference. That is my interest. What are you talking about? I'm not giving up my interest. My interest is in the welfare of everybody. Why would it be narrower? Oh, man, you've forgotten from whence you came. You're on a higher rung than I am. Well, yeah, that's the disinterested. That is no special interest, no vested interest, the compassion that the bodhisattvas have. So they're not playing favorites. Now, I realize you may benefit from being a special devotee, but anybody could do that. They're not playing favorites. Blessings will come to those who are devoted to someone like Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara, but that's not because they're playing favorites. They're equally accessible by any and all. Okay, so for the benefit of the laity, the bodhisattvas and glorified Buddhas function like gods, or maybe even better, more to the point, saints, answering prayers for earthly blessings. Many popular Buddhists view the bodhisattvas as just like gods they can pray to for a good harvest. Well, maybe they'll give you one. The Buddha thought stuff like that, though innocent, was not really religiously relevant, but it becomes that way. It becomes relevant in Mahayana Buddhism because to control the weather for someone's well-being is a good deed a bodhisattva can do, accumulating good karma so that he can share that in turn with his devotees. So it all works out pretty darn well. And in that sense, I would say you do have a kind of broader vehicle approach. You've been able this way to add back in some of the popular religion that high and mighty Theravada Buddhism omitted in a kind of a, I don't want to say snobbish way, but a high-minded way. I mean, you can't criticize it. But the idea that we're just not interested in gimmicks and goodies. Well, this is a different approach. Yes, it's not all that important in its own right, but it can become important. Any favor you do somebody is a good deed. It's a good thing for you and the other person that you did it, no matter what it was inherently. So what's the difference between a Buddha and a bodhisattva? Ultimately not much, it's just where they are on the line of the 10 stages and a ritual path. The other side of this was the bodhisattva doctrine and this non-dualist doctrine. Let me get into that a bit more. I said let's bookmark that and come back to it. This goes hand in hand with the doctrine of the void. With the bodhisattva doctrine, because remember I said a moment ago, or was it an hour ago, I lose track, that you might as well go ahead and make your vows to procure salvation for all beings and to defer your own until that goal is reached, because nobody really can be saved until everybody is. Now, why would that be? Well, because of this doctrine of the void, this non-dualist notion, which is held by different schools of Mahayana Buddhism, with different idioms, different ways of understanding it. And let's just deal with a couple of them that are especially interesting, though this is disgracefully oversimplified. I'm just afraid that, well, I'd have to do a lot of boning up on it, which one day I'm going to do, to share it with you. But if I did, at this point, I have a hunch, that'd be overkill. We ought to do that on a whole separate course on Buddhism, which sometime I'd love to do. But let's just scandalously oversimplify the thought of Nagarjuna, a man contemporary with the New Testament. He was active around 100 to 200 CE or AD. Well, did he live a whole century? He might have, but he must have lived longer than that if he's active during that whole period. Well, no, that just kind of means we're not exactly sure when he was active. It's in that period somewhere. He taught a form of non-dualism, and especially from which Shankara later borrowed for his interpretation of the Upanishads, etc. But whereas Shankara applied it to metaphysics, ontology, what is real, Nagarjuna is just talking about a state of mind, but it's all very analogous to the point where, Nagarjuna would have been a pure idealist, denying the reality of any material world. And Shankara didn't want to go that far, but this is it's really a secondary difference. They have so much in common. You could say the same thing about Meister Eckhart in Christianity, too. Let's see, Maya again. The doctrine of Maya implies that all differences, all diversity, all plurality in the world as it seems to us are illusory. Ultimately, reality, or at least experienced reality, we might want to put it that way, is the sunyata, the void, S-U-N-Y-A-T-A. You're going to be tested on this. Just kidding. That's maybe the best thing about this whole thing. We don't have to scurry to take illegible notes to be ready for an exam. Okay, ultimately, experienced reality is the void, a pure and undifferentiated field of unitary experience. Remember, you're going to enter into this in a kind of a trance state. It is experience. That's all it is. This experience is finally devoid of all of the artificial distinctions we introduce in order to slice the pie of reality. It is empty of all of the truths, quote-unquote, we believe, which in fact are half-truths and therefore misleading, causing the world to seem divided when it is not. This is a way of transcending. This has the same goal that the Jnana Yoga of Shankara had. This is the kind of thing that Ramanuja described but did not think was the ultimate experience. This sinking back into the oceanic feeling of the womb, as Freud calls it. But this is the ultimate experience according to Nagarjuna. And as if you didn't know, his name is Nagarjuna. The bliss of the Naga with Serpent King. Nagarjuna. The void is also referred to as the Buddha nature. All things, quote, unquote, contain the Buddha nature, since all things are but illusory fragments of it, like the color bands of the white light, you might say. It's refracted into illusory difference. Another way of discussing the void is to bring in the Trikaya doctrine, the doctrine of the three bodies of the Buddha, so-called, the three levels of experienced reality. The ultimate one, above the glorious heavenly existence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, is called the Dharmakaya. There's our old friend Dharma again. Dharmakaya, the Dharmakaya, the Dharma body, the void of Buddha nature, the oneness above the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, a level on which they are all one, and that they can include you and me. We'll see how when we get, well, really that's the goal. One drops away individual existence. The second level, or the so-called body of the Buddha, again, the Sambodhkaya, Sambodhkaya, the enjoyment body, literally, or the glory body, or glorified body, the celestial realm in which the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas exist, or seem to exist. Third is the Nirmankaya, Nirmankhy, the transformation body. This is the illusory, worldly Maya world of samsara. The Buddhas appear in it again by a phantom birth in a phantom body and go through the charade of the life of Gautama. Even in their earthly existence, as I say, the gifted among their disciples can already discern whether they're true, at least truer, form on the Sambodhkaya. One observes the several subtle marks of the Superman, the different counts of them. So there's 16 marks of the Superman, 32 marks of the Superman, etc. What do they consist? Well, you've seen pictures of the Buddha or various Buddhas and thought, well, that looks a little odd to have earlobes that long. Well, this is not a result of some Ubangi kind of a thing where they're stretching the earlobes. No, you're just supposed to have Lyndon Johnson size and style earlobes. It's just a sign. There may be some symbolism in it, I don't know. But it's a sign that this man is not quite what he seems. there might be a tuft of hair between the eyebrows and just above them where, let's say, someone might have a caste mark in Hinduism. That is a hint that the person has the open third eye spiritually, that penultimate chakra is activated. And if you were to... Now, this is what anybody could see, but it's a hint to the much more drastic reality you would see if your eyes were open. You've seen pictures of Buddha where he'll have a kinky... his hair will be kinky, almost like knitted, and there'll be a top knot. Well, that's supposed to occurring naturally. That is a sign of the crown chakra. It's sort of like an invisible halo. And if you could see past these little hints, and there are many other ones obviously, you would see a 20-foot high glowing human form with the open eye and the whole shebang. And that would be the Sambhogakaya. Does anybody out there in radio land remember a gospel story that is very Buddhist in this sense? Yes, you're right. It's the Transfiguration. Jesus goes up to the mountain only with a select few, not even all the disciples, very Gnostic motif. He goes up there with a few, and presumably James, John, Peter, and Andrew, I think Andrew's in one version of it. These guys are the adepts. They are the ones that know best. At least in this story, they're pretty stupid otherwise, but they go up there and they suddenly see Jesus transfigured like Moses on Mount Sinai. His face glows like the sun. His clothes become whiter than the earthly laundryman could bleach them, it says. And then he's there with Moses and Elijah, or as I say in one of my Saint Iadasat tales, with Dipankara and Amitabha, and so on. And then when the disciples, they're terrified, but suddenly a cloud overtakes them, and Jesus is back in his ordinary mortal form, and the others are gone. Boy, I tell you, there's probably a lot of ways of explaining this, but it sounds pretty darn Buddhist to me. Okay, so the three bodies. Sometimes we hear that is like the doctrine of the Trinity. Well, the threeness isn't enough to do that. This is a bit like the Hindu Trinity in that it says there are these levels of manifestation. And there's a one behind the three, but I don't think Christianity really wants to say that. I think in Christianity the oneness is on the same level as the threeness somehow. That's a real problem. Nagarjuna had a real insight that came out of this, called Nagarjuna's dialectic, that made it possible to take a more positive view of samsara, the realm of suffering and death and reincarnation. Now, you remember that Theravada Buddhists sought to flee samsara by becoming monks and nuns, leaving this world system. Or the Arhat wants nothing more to do with it. He doesn't want to be reincarnated in it again. And you can see why. It's the realm where, aren't you just enduring it at all? Didn't the early Mahayana Buddhists say that? Well, all right, it was a sacrifice, but the Buddha was willing to stay here for the sake of us poor slobs. Wow, what a sacrifice. I'd rather be the heck out of this dump. But Nagarjuna said, wait a second. If all is one, couldn't you say that samsara and nirvana are the same thing? They're not polar opposites. You don't flee one to get to the other as if it was a place of refuge or something. No, you see, it's a trick of the light. It's all in your perspective. This shifting, changing world that frustrates and disappoints, this impermanence, flux, whatever you want to call it, it's not inherently bad. It becomes bad only because you expect it to be something it is not and cannot be, namely the source of lasting satisfaction. Now, that can't happen. I can't get no satisfaction, not in the world of samsara. But that's not the fault of samsara. You're barking up the wrong tree. It's not some sort of veil of tears necessarily. It's not some evil place. No, you just have to get straight the difference that nirvana is the goal of those who would have peace and cessation and surcease from desire and suffering. Of course, you're not going to find that in samsara, but it's stupid to look for it there. And once you realize you shouldn't, you can look back at samsara and actually enjoy it for what it is, a kind of a passing show. I mean, what is it? What do you see? It's sure it's fleeting. Sure it's impermanent. It's like the magic colors shining on a soap bubble. Wow, isn't that beautiful? Look, it's gone. It's popped. Yeah, that's right. There was no guarantee, no reason to think it would be permanent. It's just something its beauty is transient, and you rejoice in it in the moment, the split second it's visible. And the whole of fleeting, changing life is like that. It's not to be despised. In fact, in its fleeting character, it's all the more precious. And so Buddhist art began to thrive. And sometimes purposely ephemeral Buddhist art to make this point. It's beautiful, but it doesn't last. But that doesn't mean it's not beautiful. The Buddhist sand mandalas, sand paintings, a great deal of time goes into this to make all these incredible intricacies inside the huge drawn wheel. And you use sand grains and all this, and you let people see it for a while, and then right, you disperse it, you got to start over. What are you doing? No, that's on purpose. We're trying to enjoy the beauty, but if we didn't do this, the wind would, right? Or some cat would, or some rabbit would, or some kid would. No, we're trying to make the point that it's beautiful, like the soap bubble. Don't expect it to be more, because that's the only way it disappoints. That's the only way it seems sinister. And don't you see what that has to do with the bodhisattva's call? She mustn't neurotically flee this world as some kind of a hideous leper colony or something. No, this world isn't so bad if you realize it is not the veil of salvation. Then it won't be so disappointing that it will seem to be the veil of damnation either. It's okay for what it is. There's no reason not to hang around in it and try to help those who don't yet understand the right way to look at it. So we don't flee samsara for nirvana. Since it's a trick of perspective, we come to realize that nirvana and samsara are the same thing, or at least one might say in the same place. One begins to see the witch-fired glow of nirvana peeking out around the edges even of samsara. I'd say that is pretty brilliant. There is also, a good bit later, probably 100 years later, a very different, but still non-dualist school of Mahayana Buddhism called the Yogacara school, which just means the practice of yoga school. This was founded by a pair of brothers who both became monks, one known as Vasubandhu. Boy, what a great name that is. Vasubandhu, 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 who lived between 420 and 500 CE, or AD, and Asanga, Asanga. He lived overlapping 410 to 500 CE. These guys are trying to account for what the one non-dual reality is. It's not matter, it is experience. Well, what sort of medium contains that? And these guys came up with the Yogacara school, which teaches the mind-only doctrine. There is but one great all-encompassing mind. That doesn't necessarily mean it exists out there somewhere like V'ger on Star Trek. We're talking about experience. The mind is an experienced thing. What exactly it has to do with the brain is still debated. But the mind is the experienced you. And only the you is pretty darn big. A kind of collective unconscious, you might say, to borrow Jung's term. Now, this puts a whole different spin on the old anatta doctrine of Buddhism, the no self, no soul doctrine. What do you mean, new spin? Isn't this a total distortion? If all is mind and mind only, no. You see, in Theravada, the belief was that the anatta, the no self, no soul doctrine, implies there is no individual self other than the skandhas, the various aggregates of your personality, etc. Remember, like the parts and pieces of the chariot, once they were all isolated and eliminated, there was no object called a chariot left. Well, there is no self either beyond your perceptions, desires, thoughts, instincts, etc. So the Theravada Buddhists were concerned about the prospect of the individual self, and said you don't have one. It's merely an illusion, a mirage, occasioned by the experience of the skandhas. Well, the Yogacara, Mahayana Buddhists are saying there is no individual soul or self detached from the great universal mind. That's the point. There is one vast capital S self. They're not little chopped off, split off, small s selves. And how does one attain the experiential knowledge of this universal mind? Well, through yoga. They're accepting the ancient practices of yoga. The school of Nagarjuna, a couple of centuries earlier, that is more of a jnana or Gnostic thing. Simply knowing it puts it into perspective. These guys are saying, no, it is more subtle than that. You're going to have to realign your mind to grasp this. It's not going to be that easy to do. I want next to get into Zen Buddhism, which seems reductionistic or at least impatient with the intricacies of other types of Buddhism, but we'll see that it is genuine Mahayana Buddhism. But as with so many types of Buddhism, it evolves forward by zeroing in on a neglected implication of the past, of previous types of Buddhism. And this is the notion of emptiness, which is a corollary of the Maya notion. Maya was that everything is illusion, right? Well, what we mean here is that the Buddhist way of putting this is that things have no dharmas, no essence, no inner law of consistency. There's only emptiness. One can intuit this. I remember one day when I was doing my first funeral as a minister. Wasn't intimidated or anything. It was a fascinating occasion. We were waiting for everybody to arrive at the funeral home, and there I was in my little homily and stuff, and I was looking out at the very mundane skyline somewhere in Patterson, Garfield, or someplace in northern New Jersey. kind of dingy neighborhood and a cloudy day, and it just suddenly dawned on me, there is just emptiness at the heart of everything. It's just kind of a bunch of sand thrown up in the air, little mites in the sunshine. There's nothing to it somehow. Well, that doesn't mean a darn thing, right? But it did occur to me in that moment that there is emptiness. Things have no Dharma. That there's just illusion, and yet in a sense it is not illusion as experience. So you're just trying to account for experience, and so everything is empty. And if that means everything, the flip side of that is that even Buddhism, its doctrine, is empty. There's nothing sacred about it, in a sense. And when it's done whatever it's designed to do, that's the only reason for keeping it around. You don't need to anymore. And so we're going to find that Zen is a very unconventional, offbeat, unorthodox approach to enlightenment that sits loose to most of the traditional